The crystalline spires of the imperial palace on Prime gleamed under the twin suns as Emperor the Magnificent prepared for his surprise inspection. Standing nearly 12 feet tall with scales that shifted between deep emerald and burnished gold, the Dragon Emperor was a sight that had made entire star systems surrender without firing a single shot. His four wings, each spanning 20 feet, rustled with barely contained energy as he reviewed the reports from his acquisition. Earth, such a small, unremarkable planet orbiting a yellow dwarf star. The conquest had been almost laughably easy. The humans had lasted exactly 47 minutes against his advance fleet before their governments began transmitting surrender frequencies. No glorious battle, no heroic last stands, just a species that seemed to understand when they were completely outmatched. Pathetic, rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. And yet, intelligence reports suggest they make adequate servants, clean, efficient, and most importantly, utterly broken in spirit. His aide, a serpentine Naga named, slithered closer with a data pad clutched in his coils. Your Imperial Magnificence, the human integration program has proceeded faster than expected. Lord General reports that the specimens adapt quickly to their assigned roles. His golden eyes narrowed. Specimens, they are servants now, property of the Empire. How fares my new palace on there? The construction proceeds apace, mighty one. The humans work, surprisingly well. Lord General estimates completion 6 months ahead of schedule. The Dragon Emperor's massive head tilted thoughtfully. 6 months ahead of schedule? That was unusual. Most conquered species either worked slowly due to despair or sabotaged projects out of spite. The few that worked efficiently were typically the ones already accustomed to slavery, like the "I believe I shall make an unannounced inspection," announced, his decision causing scales to pale. "Ready my personal dreadnought. I want to see these efficient humans for myself." "But Your Magnificence, the visit is not scheduled for another 3 months. The preparations, the protocols, are unnecessary," cut him off with a wave of one massive clawed hand. "If these humans are truly as broken as reported, a surprise visit will confirm it. If they are planning some foolish rebellion, my early arrival will crush it before it begins." 3 days later, the Emperor's personal dreadnought, the Eternal Dominance, materialized in Earth's orbit. The ship was a monument to Imperial might, 2 miles long, armed with planet crackers, and surrounded by an escort of heavy cruisers. Its arrival sent every human settlement into what the monitoring stations reported as appropriate panic and submission responses. Materialized on the surface via, his arrival creating a small crater in the manicured gardens of what had once been called Central Park in New York. His wings spread wide, blotting out the sun for several city blocks as he surveyed his new domain. The air tasted of fear and resignation, exactly as it should. Lord General, a massive reptilian creature with cybernetic enhancements covering half his hide, prostrated himself before his emperor. "My lord, you honor us with your early presence. Rise, show me this palace that is being built ahead of schedule." The general's artificial eye whirred as it focused. "At once, Magnificence, though I must warn you, the humans, they are strange creatures, efficient, yes, but their methods are sometimes unconventional." Followed his general through the transformed cityscape. Where once stood glass towers and concrete structures, now rose the beginnings of a proper imperial palace. Dark obsidian walls inscribed with runes stretched toward the sky, while thermal vents had been redirected to create the properly sulfurous atmosphere he preferred. The architecture was unmistakably imperial, yet something about it seemed different. The humans work without overseers. Notice the absence of draconian guards. "They require minimal supervision, my lord. In fact, they seem to work faster when left alone. I stationed guards initially, but productivity increased 40% when I removed them." This was highly unusual. Most conquered species required constant intimidation to maintain productivity. The Emperor filed this observation away as they approached the main construction site. What he saw there made him pause. Humans swarmed over the massive structure like industrious insects, but their movements had a precision and coordination that spoke of something beyond mere compliance. They worked in perfect synchronization, anticipating each other's needs, passing materials with an efficiency that rivaled his own engineer-cast draconians. "How many humans work this site?" he asked. "Approximately 12,000, Magnificence. 3 shifts, continuous work cycles." "Watched a human female. tiny compared to his massive frame, probably not even 6 feet tall, directing a team that was installing one of the massive thermal regulators he required for proper climate control. The device weighed nearly 50 tons and required delicate calibration to avoid catastrophic system failure. The human female moved with quick, decisive gestures. Her team responded instantly, adjusting positioning and alignment with mechanical precision. Within minutes, they had accomplished what should have taken his engineer caste the better part of a day. "That human," he pointed with one claw toward the female, "bring her to me." Hesitated. "My lord, she is merely a servant. Surely you do not wish to." "Did I stutter, General?" "Of course not, Magnificence, at once." The human female was summoned immediately. As she approached, noted several things that struck him as odd. First, she showed no signs of the cowering terror that typically characterized newly conquered populations. Second, her clothing, while simple, was clean and appeared to be maintained rather than the rags he expected from a broken people. Third, and most remarkably, she looked directly at him. "Your name, human," he commanded, his voice deliberately pitched to invoke fear. "Sarah, your Imperial Magnificence," she replied with a slight bow. Her voice was steady, respectful, but not trembling. "You direct the thermal regulator installation." "Yes, sir. My team and I have been working on integrating the draconian environmental systems with Earth's existing infrastructure." His massive head tilted. "Integrating? The infrastructure of a conquered world is irrelevant. It should be demolished and replaced." Sarah's expression didn't change, but he caught something flickering in her eyes, not fear, but what almost looked like amusement. "With respect, Your Magnificence, demolishing the existing power grid, water systems, and transportation networks would have delayed construction by approximately 18 months. We developed a hybrid approach that incorporates imperial standards while utilizing existing human infrastructure for support systems." The Dragon Emperor stared at this tiny human who spoke to him as if she were presenting a technical report rather than defending her life before the most powerful being in the galaxy. "You developed this approach?" "My team and I, yes, sir. We also took the liberty of improving the thermal efficiency of the design by redirecting the geothermal taps through the subway system. It provides both the sulfurous atmosphere you prefer and reduces energy consumption by 30%. Felt a strange sensation in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in centuries of conquest. This human had not only completed his construction ahead of schedule, but had improved upon draconian engineering. Imperial engineering that had conquered 1,000 worlds. "Show me," he commanded. For the next hour, Sarah led the Dragon Emperor through the construction site, explaining modifications and improvements with the casual competence of someone discussing a weekend hobby project. She showed him how her teams had strengthened the foundation using a technique that combined draconian metallurgy with human nanotechnology. She demonstrated the improved waste heat recovery system that would reduce operational costs by millions of credits annually. Most shocking of all, when they reached a section where her team was installing the ceremonial combat arena, she casually mentioned, "We noticed the design called for a standard Imperial gladiator pit, but given your wingspan, we increased the ceiling height and arena diameter by 30%. The original specifications would have been cramped." Cramped, this human had examined his personal specifications and found them inadequate. The strange sensation in his chest intensified. It took him several moments to identify it because he hadn't felt it in over 3 centuries. "Surprise." As they concluded the tour, Sarah bowed again. "Is there anything else you'd like to see, Your Magnificence? We're currently ahead of schedule on all major systems, and I believe you'll find the completed palace exceeds all Imperial standards." Stared down at this tiny human female who spoke of exceeding Imperial standards as if it were a perfectly normal Tuesday. You did all this while I was away." "Yes, sir. We wanted to ensure everything was ready for your arrival." "But I arrived 3 months early." Sarah smiled, actually smiled at the Dragon Emperor, and said words that would echo in his mind for days to come. "We know, sir. We've been ready for 2 weeks." The sensation in his chest suddenly had a name. It wasn't surprise anymore. It was the first flutter of panic. These humans had not only anticipated his surprise inspection, they had been waiting for it. They had completed his palace ahead of his early schedule and spent 2 weeks. Doing what? Preparing, planning. For the first time in his thousand-year reign, Emperor the Magnificent looked at a conquered species and wondered if perhaps he had made a terrible mistake. But that was impossible. These were humans. Tiny, weak, recently conquered humans who had surrendered in 47 minutes. Weren't they? The evening feast in his newly completed throne room should have been a celebration of imperial dominance. Reclined on his massive obsidian throne, a masterwork of draconian craftsmanship that had been perfectly installed by human hands. The thermal vents created the perfect sulfurous atmosphere, the lighting was calibrated to his exact preferences, and every detail met or exceeded imperial standards. So why did he feel increasingly unsettled? The human servants moved through the hall with practiced efficiency, serving the finest delicacies from across the empire. Sat at the general's table, regaling the assembled draconian officers with tales of the construction's remarkable progress. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should, except for the small details that gnawed its ancient mind. "General," he called, his voice cutting through the dinner conversation. "A word." The reptilian approached the throne with proper deference. "Yes, my emperor." "Tell me about the human work crews. Have there been any incidents, sabotage attempts, rebellious gatherings?" Cybernetic eye clicked as it refocused. "None whatsoever, Magnificence. If anything, they seem enthusiastic about the work." "Enthusiastic," repeated the word as if it tasted strange. "Explain." "Well, my lord, they often work past their required shifts. They submit improvement suggestions without being asked. Yesterday, a team of humans requested additional materials to reinforce a section that wasn't even in their work orders." The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed. "They requested materials for work that wasn't assigned." "Yes, Magnificence. The female you spoke with today, Sarah, she submitted a report suggesting that the Armory Foundation needed additional seismic dampeners. Her analysis was correct. Had we not reinforced it, the first weapons test would have caused structural damage." Felt that flutter of unease again. She analyzed the Armory Foundations. How? I'm not entirely sure, my lord. She simply presented the calculations and recommendations." "Bring me her file. All human files, actually. I want to understand what manner of servants we have acquired." An hour later, sat in his private chambers reviewing data that made his unease transform into something approaching concern. According to the files, Sarah had been a construction project manager before the conquest. The term was unfamiliar, but the description suggested she had supervised building projects. What troubled him was the scale. The files indicated she had managed construction projects involving tens of thousands of workers, billion credit budgets, and timelines spanning years. On a planet with no FTL technology, no manipulation, and primitive metallurgy, this human had routinely overseen construction projects that rivaled imperial engineering efforts. He moved through more files. The humans working on his palace weren't random servants selected for basic labor. They were engineers, architects, project managers, systems analysts, and technical specialists. Their primitive society had apparently produced these individuals in vast numbers. "Computer, display human technological assessment," he commanded. The holographic display showed the standard Imperial Conquest analysis. Primitive FTL capability, none. Energy weapons, basic. Technology, non-existent. Space-based military assets, minimal. Overall threat assessment, negligible. Computer, display human industrial capacity analysis. This data made him pause. Despite their technological limitations, humans had transformed their entire planet's surface within mere centuries. They had built millions of structures, created transportation networks spanning continents, and developed manufacturing capability that produced goods for billions of individuals. All without the benefit of imperial technology. "Computer, show me the conquest timeline again." The familiar data appeared. Human military resistance, 47 minutes. Casualty ratio, 1,847,392 to 1 in favor of Imperial forces. Human surrender, complete and unconditional. But as he studied the timeline more carefully, something odd became apparent. The human governments hadn't just surrendered, they had surrendered almost immediately, before the Imperial fleet had even demonstrated its full capability, almost as if they had known exactly how outmatched they were. and decided instantly that resistance was futile. That wasn't the behavior of a primitive, emotional species. That was the behavior of a species that could rapidly analyze a situation and make pragmatic decisions based on logical assessment of available options. Stood and paced to his window, looking out over the city that had been transformed in mere months. In the distance, he could see human work crews still active, their construction lighting illuminating projects that continued around the clock. Computer, connect me with Intelligence Division. The holographic image of Commander appeared, the Intelligence Chief's compound eyes gleaming with reflected light. Your Magnificence honors me. I require a comprehensive analysis of human behavior patterns since the conquest. Have they attempted to contact other species, develop weapons, organize resistance cells? Negative on all counts, my Emperor, however. However what? There have been some unusual communication patterns, significant increases in their information networks, technical knowledge sharing at unprecedented levels, but nothing that appears threatening to Imperial interests. Show me. The data stream that followed made Swings twitch involuntarily. Human communication networks had exploded with activity since the conquest. Technical manuals, engineering specifications, scientific theories, and educational materials were being shared globally at rates that strained their primitive data infrastructure. But it wasn't random information. The humans were systematically sharing knowledge about metallurgy, construction techniques, power systems, transportation networks, and manufacturing processes. Commander, in your analysis, what are the humans doing with this shared information? They appear to be learning magnificence. Their technical has increased by measurable percentages in just the month since conquest. Learning, repeated the word slowly. They are educating themselves. Yes, my lord, though I should note, they seem to be focusing primarily on technologies that improve their efficiency as servants, nothing that could threaten imperial security. The Dragon Emperor dismissed the communication and returned to his packing. A conquered species that immediately surrendered, then set about systematically improving their capability to serve their conquerors. On the surface, it was the behavior of an ideally broken population, but had conquered hundreds of species over his millennium of reign. He had never encountered anything like this. A soft chime indicated someone requested entry. Enter. To his surprise, Sarah stepped through the door, carrying a data pad and wearing the same calm expression she had maintained throughout their earlier encounter. Your Magnificence, I apologize for the late hour. I wanted to present tomorrow's progress report and discuss a few logistical considerations. Stared at this tiny human who had entered the private chambers of the most powerful being in the galaxy to discuss logistical considerations, as if she were stopping by a colleague's office. You came here to discuss logistics. Yes, sir. We've completed the primary palace structure ahead of schedule, and I wanted to confirm your preferences for the secondary installations. We have several options for the communication arrays, transportation systems, and defensive networks. Defensive networks? His voice sharpened. What defensive networks? Sarah consulted her data pad. Standard Imperial Palace defensive systems, sir. Energy shields, sensor grids, automated response systems. We noticed the specifications in the construction database and wanted to ensure we installed them to your exact preferences. The Emperor felt his worldview shift slightly. This human had accessed Imperial construction databases that contained defensive specifications. That information was supposed to be classified beyond the clearance level of conquered populations. How did you access those specifications? Lord General provided access when we requested technical references to ensure proper installation. We needed to integrate the defensive systems with the primary structure during construction rather than retrofitting them later. Had given humans access to Imperial military databases, made a mental note to have words with his general. These defensive networks, he continued carefully, you understand what they are. Yes, sir. Energy barrier generators, sensor arrays capable of detecting incoming threats, and automated weapon systems for perimeter defense. The designs are quite elegant, though we did notice a few potential improvements. The words hit him like a physical blow. Improvements. Sarah's expression brightened slightly. Would you like to see the analysis? We identified 3 potential enhancements that could increase defensive efficiency by approximately 20% while reducing energy consumption. For a long moment, the Dragon Emperor stared at this human female who stood in his private chambers discussing improvements to Imperial military technology, as if she were recommending a better recipe for baking bread. "Show me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For the next hour, Sarah walked him through modifications to Imperial defensive systems that were so obviously superior that he couldn't understand why draconian engineers hadn't thought of them centuries ago. Power routing improvements, sensor placement optimizations, and targeting algorithms that were simply better. When she finished, she looked up at him expectantly. "Should we implement these improvements, Your Magnificence? They would only add about 2 days to the installation timeline." Realized that his mouth was hanging open, a distinctly undignified expression for an emperor. He closed it carefully. "Yes," he managed. "Implement the improvements." "Excellent, I'll have the team start tomorrow. Will there be anything else, sir?" He watched her leave, her manner as professionally casual as when she had arrived. Only after the door closed did he allow himself to acknowledge what was happening. This human had just improved upon military technology that had been perfected over of draconian conquest, casually, as if it were a minor detail in a routine construction project. Slumped into his throne and tried to process what he was learning about his new human servants. They surrendered immediately when faced with overwhelming force, then systematically set about making themselves indispensable by becoming better at everything than the species that had conquered them. The flutter of unease was now a steady drumbeat of concern. For the first time in centuries, Emperor the Magnificent wondered if he had conquered the humans, or if they had allowed themselves to be conquered. And if it was the latter, what exactly were they planning? 3 days after Sarah's casual improvement of Imperial military technology, found himself doing something unprecedented in his 1,000-year reign, conducting his own investigation of his servants. He had dismissed his draconian guards and was moving through the human sections of the city alone, using his natural camouflage abilities to observe undetected. What he discovered made his growing concern transform into something approaching existential terror. The humans weren't just working, they were teaching each other. In every gathering space, small groups clustered around individuals sharing knowledge. A human who had learned draconian metallurgy techniques was demonstrating them to dozens of others. An engineer who had figured out manipulation principles was explaining them with crude diagrams drawn in the dirt. A former doctor was teaching others about draconian biology and physiology. They were turning themselves into a species-wide technical university, with every human becoming both student and teacher. But it was what they were teaching that made blood run cold. The key to their FTL drives, a human was explaining to a rapt audience, is the quantum field manipulation matrix. If you route the power through these conduits instead of their standard configuration, you can increase efficiency by 40%. They were reverse engineering Imperial technology, not just learning to use it, but understanding it well enough to improve upon it. Shifted position to listen to another group. "Their armor has an interesting weakness," a woman was saying while sketching diagrams. "The plates overlap here and here. A kinetic projectile traveling at this angle would slip between the layers and penetrate to the vulnerable spots underneath." They were analyzing Imperial military assets, systematically identifying weaknesses and failure points. His wings began to tremble. The next group was discussing something that made his heart skip beats. "The Emperor's species requires a sulfurous atmosphere and temperatures above 150 degrees Fahrenheit, a man was explaining. But their metabolic processes shut down if certain gases are introduced to their environment, specifically compounds containing." Had heard enough. These humans weren't just learning Imperial technology. They were weaponizing their knowledge. They understood his species better than most Imperial citizens, knew his technology better than his own engineers, and were systematically every weakness and vulnerability in his empire. He teleported directly back to his palace and immediately summoned Lord General. "General," he said without preamble, "how many humans have access to Imperial technical databases?" Cybernetic I-word. "Access, my lord? Well, all of them require some level of access to perform their duties effectively. Perhaps 12,000 humans have varying degrees of database access. 12,000. His voice was deadly quiet. And how many Imperial personnel are currently on Earth? Our garrison numbers approximately 800 Draconians, my lord, plus support staff from various allied species. Perhaps 1,500 total. 1,500 Imperial forces, 12,000 humans with access to Imperial technology and databases. The mathematics were not in his favor. General, in your assessment, what is the human attitude toward Imperial rule? They seem content magnificence, productive and cooperative, though. Though what? They ask many questions, my lord. Technical questions about Imperial systems, cultural questions about our society, strategic questions about our military assets. But they frame these inquiries as necessary for their duties. Felt the walls of his carefully constructed reality crumbling around him. General, show me the orbital defenses. My lords, the planetary defense systems, show me their current status. They proceeded to the command center, where holographic displays showed Earth's defensive capabilities. What saw there finally pushed him over the edge from concern into full panic. The orbital platforms were not only operational, they had been improved. The humans had enhanced targeting systems, improved power routing, and optimized firing solutions. What should have been standard defensive installations had been transformed into weapons of devastating efficiency. Who authorized these modifications? His voice shook the walls. The humans suggested them, my lord. They claimed the improvements would better protect Imperial assets on the surface. And you didn't think to question why conquered servants were making military recommendations. For the first time, looked uncertain. They presented the improvements as logical enhancements to protect your safety, magnificence. Stared at the tactical displays and finally understood what had been happening. The humans hadn't been conquered. They had been recruited. Every improvement, every suggestion, every helpful modification had been designed to make Imperial forces dependent on human knowledge and capabilities, while simultaneously giving humans access to every aspect of Imperial technology and strategy. The humans had studied his empire, identified its weaknesses, and positioned themselves to exploit those weaknesses while appearing to be loyal servants. It was the most sophisticated strategic deception he had encountered in a millennium of conquest. Computer, connect me with Admiral in orbit. The holographic image of the fleet commander appeared, his reptilian features showing confusion. Your Magnificence, is there a problem? Admiral, status of the human work crews aboard the fleet. Proceeding excellently, my lord. The humans have improved our maintenance efficiency by 60%. Our ships are operating at peak performance for the first time in decades. How many humans are currently aboard Imperial vessels? Approximately 4,000 across the fleet. They've been invaluable for... Cut the connection. 4,000 humans aboard his fleet. Humans who now understood Imperial technology better than Imperial engineers. Humans who had access to ship systems, navigation databases, and communication networks. His entire fleet was compromised. A soft chime indicated someone requested entry, knew who it would be before the door opened. Sarah stepped inside, carrying her ever-present data pad, but this time her expression was different. The professional deference was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like sympathy. Your Magnificence, she said quietly, I think we need to talk. For the first time in his life, the Dragon Emperor felt small. You knew I would figure it out. We hoped you would. You're clearly intelligent, and intelligence tends to recognize patterns eventually. The surrender, the immediate compliance, the eager cooperation, it was all planned. Sarah nodded. We analyzed your empire's expansion patterns centuries before you arrived. We knew conquest was inevitable, so we prepared. Prepared how? We studied every species you've conquered. We learned your technology, your culture, your psychology. We identified the optimal strategy for surviving Imperial occupation. Felt ancient, which was become indispensable. Make ourselves so useful that you can't function without us, while simultaneously learning everything about you. And then, Sarah's expression became almost gentle. Your Magnificence, when was the last time your empire actually grew? When did you last successfully integrate new territory or expand your capabilities? The question hit him like a physical blow. It had been centuries. His empire had been stagnant for centuries, maintaining existing territory but failing to grow or innovate. Your civilization has reached what we call imperial stagnation, she continued. You've conquered everything you can conquer, but you've lost the ability to adapt and grow. You're slowly dying and you don't even realize it. And you offer what? Revolution, war, partnership. The word hung in the air between them like an alien concept. Partnership's voice was barely a whisper. Your empire needs what humanity offers: innovation, adaptation, growth. We need what your empire provides: protection, resources, galactic infrastructure. We propose a merger rather than a conquest. A merger, he tested the word, between equals. Between complementary civilizations. We handle technological development, innovation, and system optimization. You provide military protection, resource distribution, and political stability. Stared at this tiny human who was calmly proposing the restructuring of a galactic empire. And if I refuse? Sarah shrugged. Then we continue as we are. Your loyal, helpful servants who gradually become better at running your empire than you are, until eventually you realize you're the emperor of an empire run entirely by humans. The terrible beauty of it struck him. The humans hadn't conquered his empire through force. They had conquered it through competence. They had made themselves so valuable that rejecting their partnership would cripple his civilization. You planned this entire scenario from the moment our fleets arrived. Actually, we planned it from the moment we detected your scout ships 3 years ago. Everything since then has been implementing a strategy designed to achieve this conversation. Felt a strange emotion creeping through his chest. After a moment, he identified it as something he hadn't experienced in centuries: respect. You magnificent, terrifying little creatures, he said finally. You've conquered my empire without firing a shot. We've offered you evolution, your magnificence. The choice of whether to accept it is yours. The Dragon Emperor looked out at his city, his palace, his empire, all of it now revealed to be held together by human knowledge and capabilities. His subjects throughout the galaxy were becoming dependent on human innovations. His fleets operated on human improvements. His defenses relied on human modifications. The humans had made themselves the nervous system of his empire. He could try to reject their partnership and watch his civilization collapse, or he could adapt to a reality where humanity was no longer his servants but his partners. For a being who had spent a millennium as the ultimate authority in the galaxy, it should have been a humiliating defeat. Instead, as he looked at Sarah and considered the implications of human partnership, found himself feeling something else he hadn't experienced in centuries. Excitement about the future. Very well, he said finally. Let us discuss the terms of this partnership. Sarah smiled and activated her data pad. I was hoping you'd say that. We've prepared several proposals for your consideration. Of course they had. The Dragon Emperor settled back on his throne and prepared to negotiate the transformation of his empire with the most dangerous species he had ever encountered. Dangerous not because they could destroy his civilization, but because they could make it better than he had ever imagined possible. And as Sarah began outlining humanity's vision for their shared future, realized that perhaps being conquered by humans was the best thing that had ever happened to his empire. Even if they had been too polite to call it a conquest,